Hello, I'm Gordon Lang, editor of CameraLabs.com. Today DSLRs are available at a whole variety of price points, but one of the fastest growing markets are for upper entry-level models. Now these are a step up from the basic budget ones, and for spending a bit of extra cash you get some extra features without going for the cost, the size, the weight and indeed the complexity of a mid-range or a semi-pro body. Now if you're shopping for an upper entry-level DSLR, chances are two models will be at or close to the top of your list. Those are the Canon EOS 600D, or Rebel T3i as it's known in North America, and Nikon's D5100. Now I've already done in-depth reviews of both of these cameras at CameraLabs.com, so if you're interested in downloading some sample images, comparing the quality in low light or in good lighting conditions, looking at some sample movies and really delving into those specifications, then please do check out both of those reviews. In this video though, I'm going to point out 10 of the most important differences between these two cameras. So if you're really having a hard time deciding which one is going to be best for you, hopefully this video will show you the way. I'll start with design and build quality. Now if you look at the specifications of these two cameras, you'll realise that the Nikon D5100 is in fact fractionally smaller in every dimension and also very slightly lighter than the Canon. But get them both in your hands and really, to be honest, they feel just about the same size and weight. Likewise if you're trying to squeeze them into a bag. However, pick them up and you do notice that they feel quite different. The D5100, like other Nikon DSLRs, has got a really nice hooked inner area on the grip for your fingers. It feels very secure in your hands. The Canon is lacking that inner grip area, but the grip itself is slightly taller, and that means that your little finger on your right hand isn't left dangling as much. There's also a more pronounced bulge on the back of the camera for your thumb rest, and a more coarse texture on the grip, which to me ultimately feels a little bit better. However, this is entirely personal, it's very subjective, so as always I'd recommend that you pick up both cameras in person and see which one feels best to you. Both cameras feature 3-inch fully articulated high-resolution screens. These tilt out and angle in almost any direction, which allows you to very comfortably film over the heads of crowds or at very low angles. And you can also turn them back on yourself for little crafty self-timer shots. Now it's important to note that the screens on both cameras are hinged at the side. Now this is nothing new for the Canon, it had a side-mounted hinge on the EOS 60D. But it is a new thing on the D5100. On its predecessor, the D5000, the screen was hinged at the bottom, which was fine. In fact, in some ways it was better because it never got in the way of the straps, but it was very annoying when you had it mounted on a tripod or even just resting on a post or a table, because when you had the screen facing towards you, it would basically be blocked. So side-mounted, 3-inch, fully articulated, these screens sound exactly the same, but as always, there's more differences than first appears. So both cameras have 3-inch screens, but they're actually different shapes. On the D5100 it's a 4x3 shape, on the Canon it's a 3x2 shape. Now since both cameras take 3x2 shaped images, that means the image fills the Canon screen, whereas on the Nikon it has a little black border along the bottom, which you can see the Nikon's using this for some shooting information, whereas it's superimposed on the Canon. But what this does mean is that the image appears quite a bit bigger on the Canon than it does on the Nikon. And it also means that the Canon is exploiting all of its screen pixels for a slightly sharper view. Now the cameras also differ slightly when it comes to actually magnifying that live view image. I'm going to magnify the Nikon one now. You can see there's quite a few steps there. That's going up to 7.7 times for an approximately 1:1 view. And that looks pretty good. You'd be able to manually focus that quite easily. Now let's see what the Canon does. It's actually only got 2 steps, 5 times and 10 times. But you can see already at that 10 times view that it's showing a much tighter area of that image. And it's also showing it with slightly sharper details as well. Now to be fair, the Nikon D5100 is a big improvement on its predecessor, and indeed the D90 in this regard. When you had those cameras fully zoomed in live view, the picture became really fuzzy, whereas on the D5100 it really is now much sharper and much easier to manually focus and confirm that focus. On the Canon though, you still get a closer view and a sharper view. So if you're the kind of person who is really into precision manual focusing in live view, you'll probably prefer the image from the Canon EOS 600D or Rebel T3i. Both cameras can also overlay a grid for alignment. That's pretty useful. However, of this pair, the Canon is the only one to offer a live histogram. For some bizarre reason, Nikon just won't implement a live histogram on any of its consumer models, and that's a real shame. Both cameras have pentamirror optical viewfinders with 95% coverage, but there are differences in terms of the magnification. The D5100 has 0.78 times magnification compared to 0.85 times on the Canon. Now when you compare those numbers, it would appear that the Canon is going to give you a much bigger view through the viewfinder, but slightly countering that is a fractionally smaller sensor on the Canon. However, when you have both cameras up to your eye at the same time, or rather one on the left and one on the right, you will notice that the Canon EOS 600D or Rebel T3i does deliver a slightly bigger viewfinder view. Not so much that it's a deal breaker on the Nikon, but there is a difference. It's also worth noting that those really nice LCD grid lines that were available on the earlier D5000 are no longer present on the D5100. Nikon says if you want those LCD grid lines, you've got to go up to the D7000. Looking through both viewfinders, you'll see that the Canon has a 9-point autofocus system compared to 11 points on the Nikon. Both cameras only have one cross-type sensor in the middle. Now numerically 11 points should be 9, but in use, to be honest, they really feel very similar. There's very few occasions when the Nikon would actually have an autofocusing advantage due to having 11 points over 9. However, the D5100 does have one autofocusing advantage over the Canon, and that is the ability to continuously autofocus in live view and in the movie mode. I'm going to show you some examples of that later on in the video. In terms of continuous shooting speed, both cameras have got fairly similar specifications. The D5100 has a slight edge, from paper anyway, with the fastest quoted speed of 4 frames per second compared to 3.7 frames per second on the Canon. But that's in theory. To put that to the practice, I've come down to shot over jet to photograph the jet boats whizzing past to see which camera is best for action photography. Now to put both models on a level playing field, they're both using the same shutter speed of 500th of a second in shutter priority, the same ISO sensitivity of 400 ISO, they're both set to continuous autofocus, they're both shooting large fine JPEGs, and they're both going to be equipped with the same memory card, a freshly formatted Lexar Professional 8GB SDHC card, and that's rated as Class 10. Now all I've got to do is wait for a boat. Okay, first up, the Canon EOS 600D or Rebel T3i. Okay, so the Canon managed to shoot about 15 to 16 frames there before it began to really stall. Now that roughly matches what I've measured before for this camera when doing formal continuous shooting speed tests, generally between about 15 and 20 large fine JPEGs, and at a slightly slower than quoted speed. I can normally get about 3.6, 3.7 frames per second out of the Canon EOS 600D or Rebel T3i. Okay, now it's the turn of the D5100. Well, that was pretty impressive. This camera kept shooting for over 30 frames there, and in formal tests I've also measured it as shooting faster than the Canon. So it has an edge in both respects, because it was shooting over 30 frames whereas the Canon was stalling at about 15 to 20. Again, in my formal tests I measured the speed of the D5100 at around 3.8 frames per second compared to the Canon at about 3.6 frames per second. So in terms of speed there's not a great deal between them, but in terms of buffer depth the D5100 certainly had the advantage, at least today it shot over jet anyway. But those continuous shooting speeds are still a bit too slow to really class either of these as proper action cameras. For that you really want something that shoots at 5 or 6, 7, even 8 frames per second. And if you want a camera that can perform like that at this price point, then you've really got to go for one of Sony's models. That's the end of the first part of this video comparing the Canon EOS 600D or Rebel T3i against the Nikon D5100. In part 2 I'll be taking a close look at the user interfaces on both cameras, seeing how you change various settings and discovering that one model is much better suited to beginners while the other one is actually targeted more at enthusiasts. I'll also be taking a detailed look at the movie modes, which may on the surface appear fairly similar, 1080p and 720p at a variety of frame rates, external microphone inputs and articulated screens. But dig a little deeper and you'll discover a number of differences that could actually really swing the decision between these two cameras for you. And finally, I'll be wrapping up all of the smaller features that I haven't covered so far. Now, to see part 2 of this video, just head on over to cameralabs.com, and if you're watching this first part on YouTube, you'll find a link directly under the video window itself. Once you're at Camera Labs, you'll also find links to full resolution sample images and also sample movies that you can download and check out on your own computer, along of course with my detailed reviews of both cameras. So just click that link and I'll see you right over there. And if you're already on Camera Labs, then just scroll down, you'll find part 2 directly under this video.